Cool. Hello, everyone. It's Freddie here from the Enforcer product team. We're just on the hour. We're going to give everyone a couple of minutes just to join, and then we'll kick things off. So see you in a couple of minutes. Cool. Hello, everyone. It's Freddie here again. I mentioned that 2 minutes past the hour we get started. So let's get started. I'm going to share my screen and let's begin. Perfect. Right. Hopefully people can see my screen. If you don't, please make loud noises in the chat. But yeah, welcome to today's webinar. So joint between Enforcer and Cloud Contracts 365. So today, I mean, it's a webinar, but also it's more of a discussion as well. Always interested in everyone getting involved in sort of the Q&A and the chat section as well. So we're really talking about two main areas today. So AI readiness and legal compliance, and really talking about why these things are important, especially when considered together, and also how you can think about practical strategies, especially in the age of things like Microsoft Copilot. Just in terms of like who's speaking today, so by way of introduction, if I've not met you before, I'm Freddie, Director of Product for AI initiatives at Enforcer. I've worked in the industry for about 10 years, so at Enforcer, also at a number of other vendors in the MSP space. So really MSP through and through in many respects. Really excited to talk to you today around AI readiness. And something I often joke about is I get asked questions around, should we do this, should we do that in the age of AI? And I give my opinion, but then I say, well, actually, I can't really give that opinion because I'm not a lawyer. So today I'm actually really excited. Sorry, Kim, for the joke. I'm actually really excited to be co-hosting with an actual lawyer today. So I'd like to introduce Kim, or Kim, would you like to introduce yourself?
Yeah, thank you, Freddie. So yes, I've been a lawyer for over 20 years, 15 years of which has been in the MSP and MSSP community. So I can say safely, this is my bread and butter. I'm also CEO and founder of Cloud Contracts 365. So with my passion being a lawyer, it made sense to automate a lot of the contracts that I was doing for MSPs, all the reviews in a legal platform, a legal AI platform, hence Cloud Contracts 365. Thank you, Freddie.
Thank you, Kim. So yeah, a few different topics that we'll go through today. And really it boils down to four main areas. I think just to kind of recap, like why AI, why now? Like there's so much change in the industry. Every single day there's new technology coming out, new opportunities, but also new risks that we'll talk about as well. So just to kind of a recap of those trends. Then we'll do a bit of a deeper dive into AI readiness and like how we see it in terms of a mixture of opportunity and how to uncover that, as well as how to break that problem down into kind of bite-sized chunks and like a problem that you can solve with your customers to take them on that AI journey. Then we'll be looking a little bit at legal and compliance risks, which I think is super important with this. AI is so powerful and it's getting more powerful every single day. And really, AI fundamentally is almost like a data problem and a governance problem. And so obviously legal and compliance is just, it has to be forefront at the top of everyone's minds. But fourth and most importantly is really making sure that from this webinar, you can all take away practical steps. There's lots of content around like AI and kind of, concepts around these things, but we want you to come away from today with, a concrete action plan of steps that you can take today, tomorrow, this week, this month, to actually start putting what we talked about into practice. On that vein, we will have a handout at the end, produced by our lovely marketing team. And yeah, if you attend the webinar, we'll send this, or finish attending, so you attend the whole thing, then we will send this to you afterwards. And this basically goes through a few different things. Firstly, it does a really good overview of just some key data points around the industry, like the adoption of AI, shadow AI, and just key considerations around getting customers ready for AI, or in particular Copilot readiness, and different considerations across security, technical readiness, data governance, legal, and other areas. So please do stay on, and we'll send that to you via email after the session has ended. So let's start. Why AI? Why now? So I think everyone's quite excited about AI. It could possibly be why you're on the webinar today. But let's just recap why this is so important. So I think the first thing to recognize is that the market is evolving quickly. When I first joined the industry just over 10 years ago now, nearly 11 years, which is scary to think. Time flies when you're having fun. A lot of stuff has happened, when we think about the MSP industry. And I'm just going to spoil it a little bit and just go all the way to the end. That was too far. So there's been a number of paradigm shifts over the past decade and a half. We've seen the migration or the movement from break fix towards managed services very, very quickly. There used to be, a real dichotomy almost between managed services and managed security services. And now, of course, if you're an MSP and you're providing services on top of M365, you are delivering security as part of that. You are delivering cybersecurity as a service. Then there was the move to cloud first, the migration of on-prem workloads into the cloud, of course, accelerated by a few different drivers like COVID-19. And then really the acceleration of Microsoft as being that kind of tier one provider that can cover off a huge span of the services that you might provide to customers, expanding into, increasingly collaboration, security, et cetera. And now it really feels like, we're on the precipice or going through a new paradigm, which is AI readiness, where something that I've heard from every single MSP that I've spoken to is they've never had so many customers excited about technology so much in such a short space of time, where there's not always an easy answer to the question of what problem is it going to solve, but people just know it adds value and they're very, very excited about it. Now, when we kind of look at it from a few different angles, there's a huge amount of risks and opportunities for MSPs, and there's a few different ways that we can look at it. First, thinking about the opportunity side, I always like to split the opportunity as you can use AI to drive your own internal efficiency, and then you can also leverage that opportunity as part of your managed service offering, so drive value into your customers. So when we think about improving your internal efficiency, really AI is a potential solution to a process automation problem. So if you want to do things like, automate administrative tasks that take up a lot of your time, if you want to improve the service delivery that you deliver to your customers, whether that's more effective onboarding workflows, whether that is improving your ability to service them if something goes wrong or they have a question. But also with automation in the age of AI, it can also be looking at ways to reduce cost or do more with less. Then we look at the other side of it, which is opportunities for AI that you can use to obviously generate more revenue and provide value to your customers. And that's really split into two main areas. There's the project work piece and also generating new recurring revenue. With the project work piece, AI fundamentally is really exciting. We all know, the powerful things it can do, but fundamentally it relies and depends on a few key things. First and foremost, a modern cloud-first IT environment, so making sure that the data is available, that data is governed correctly, the environment is secure, et cetera, and we'll go into more detail during this. But taking that customer to the right level there to make them ready for AI is, a great example of project work which you can charge for to help your customer achieve the business outcomes they're looking to achieve with AI. And the third piece is around the new recurring revenue opportunities. This is where we talk about maybe some more advanced use cases as well. There's providing, let's say, Microsoft Copilot as is, but there's also use cases around like custom agents, which fundamentally, depending how you look at it, is similar to custom software development. And so there's lots of new opportunities there for new recurring revenue based on the outcomes you're delivering for your customers. Now, a couple of risks that I'll mention here as well. The market is moving very, very quickly. A lot of businesses are now increasingly expecting their service provider to provide AI as a service. And so as an MSP, if you're not providing AI as part of your service offering, in the future that can and will potentially become a reason that they don't choose you as a service provider. And also the other risk is that contract duration within the sector continues to get shorter. And that means that expectations are higher and the ability to prove value. So if you deliver AI, whether that's doing a project for Copilot, building custom agents, etc., there's a lot more pressure than there was before to quickly prove value so they can understand what outcomes they're getting and they can make that decision to renew their services with you. And there's many opportunities here as well. Just going back to that recurring revenue talk track earlier, the opportunity to develop custom agents, deploy those to multiple customers. There's lots of opportunities there to innovate and deliver value-based pricing as opposed to pricing per application or pricing per user. But more on that a little bit later. Just wants to give a quick overview of the opportunities there. So let's talk a bit more in depth about Copilot readiness and unpack that a little bit. So this is a quote that I've got from an MSP that I've been working with, only slightly embellished, but I think we've all probably seen this kind of quote before, which is everyone's excited about AI. And I hear from many MSPs where their customers will pick up the phone and they'll say, "Hey, Mr. MSP, I'm really excited about Microsoft Copilot, for example." But when they dig into it, they're not really sure what the business case is. They just know that they can get some value, but it's difficult to really articulate how it benefits themselves, how it benefits their department, let's say, or the whole business. And also it's difficult to really know where to start in terms of solving that problem, how to get them AI ready. And the key thing about this as well, like many decisions, is if you don't take action to help customers with AI, they will just make that decision for you. This is something known as shadow AI. Whether we like it or not, everyone is starting to use AI more and more. And there's a huge amount of tools out there where you can sign up, with your personal account, with your Gmail, your Hotmail, or your email of choice, and you can start using these tools and putting business data into it and using that, even though it's completely unsanctioned. So shadow AI is going to happen whether we like to or not. I've got this stat here. So 75% of people are already using AI at work. I will note that this is actually from a Microsoft report from last year. I suspect that nowadays this is actually a little bit different and it's much closer to 100%. And so maybe that makes people feel a little bit uncomfortable. But what this means for MSPs is, it's a risk, in terms of your customers. You're providing whatever services you provide. And if you are not providing AI as a service in any way, shape, or form, you're leaving money on the table in many respects because your customers are going to be using AI from a different vendor or that is buying themselves off the shelf. They're not going to be getting the right ROI that they should be getting if they did it through their service provider. But also there's a huge number of risks, which we'll talk about later on when Kim talks about the legal and compliance aspects to this. So let's talk a little bit more about Microsoft 365. With AI, with Microsoft Copilot, I think there's a lot of advantages to really thinking around how Copilot benefits from everything you're already doing with your customers' M365 tenants. So things like Copilot, they don't use a different security model. They use everything you've already configured in your tenant. So things like conditional access with Entra, any security, so Defender, the endpoint configurations that you've put in place, any kind of controls you put around things like SharePoint, data governance, collaboration tools like Teams. Copilot is bound by all those permissions and all those configurations, all those controls. and also benefits from those as well in terms of secure collaboration. That kind of dependency means, firstly, it's really important that you manage those tenants effectively, especially across things like security, but also technical readiness and data governance. And also, it's a fantastic opportunity because if you're doing a good job of managing that tenants and making them more Copilot ready almost out the box, when that customer comes to you and says, hey, we've got a business problem we think we can solve with something like Copilot, it makes it much easier to have that conversation because the project work that's going to be necessary to take them to that next level where they can start rolling out Copilot to different stakeholders is going to be that much less. And just to kind of hammer home the point, I think I've already talked over this a little bit, but I think that's just in a nutshell the benefit of something like Copilot, which is it's completely Microsoft native and it just benefits out the box from everything that you're already doing to configure their tenant to make them secure and technically ready. And as I mentioned, if you don't provide that, they're probably going to start using AI themselves, potentially using a tool that's less secure, doesn't respect their data governance obligations, and also might not drive the right outcomes that they're looking for as well because it's not integrated with the rest of M365. Now, let's think about Copilot readiness in more detail. There's a huge number of challenges to even starting to think about this problem. As I mentioned that quote earlier, like where do you start? So here's a few observations that we've got around the industry here. I think firstly, when we think about traditional managed services, and of course, I think this is changing rapidly, that the trend seems to be the knowledge of IT infrastructure is high because that's what you do. That's what you do. That's what you've been implementing. But knowledge and understanding of the data estate and processes, so how SharePoint, for example, is actually used to process data, what the workflows look like, what the outcome actually is, can actually be quite low. And that becomes really important when we think about data governance and getting those environments ready for Copilot. The second piece, or the third piece on this slide, is SMBs want Copilot now, but they don't always understand the complexities. It's that kind of that lack of understanding piece around especially things like data governance, the importance of preventing the risk of oversharing, exposure of sensitive information, where a key thing here is being able to set expectations around, yes, people might be very excited and there's potentially a great ROI, but some work needs to be done first to get their business ready. There's also challenges about selling this. Copilot readiness in many ways is a journey. You need to ideally do some discovery and validation of your customers around what use cases are going to benefit them the most, and explore things like doing a pilot, giving Copilot to certain departments or certain champions within the customer, testing, adjusting, getting feedback continuously. That means it's quite a complicated sales process in many ways, and that's on its own challenge. Then, of course, it's a complex mixture of people, process, and technology. Imagine if you had a magic tool which can help you understand the Copilot readiness of your customers. Fundamentally, you still have to engage with that customer around the fact that their use of Copilot needs to match their processes. If you need to implement any additional controls, if you need to implement anything additional around data governance, that's going to be impacting how they work. So the process side of things, but also you need to train their people to help them understand why that's important to be AI ready. And there's a huge other number of aspects here as well. There's so much change in the industry, and so that real pressure to keep up with the pace of innovation is always there. But also, once you've actually deployed Copilot, what's next? So if you go through a sales process of a customer, you make their environment more ready, more secure, the data better governed for Copilot, what happens next in terms of helping make sure that they succeed, they adopt it correctly, they see the ROI that they kind of envisioned when they first signed up for that product. So I'm going to go through like a Maslow's hierarchy in a second and start breaking this down. But something I always like to hammer home here is that Copilot readiness, first and foremost, is not just a technical problem. And it's really important to think about what problems you're actually going to be solving with Copilot. And very quickly, I like to mention just the spectrum of capabilities here. On the left-hand side, you've got Copilot available as part of the M365 applications. So that could be you're writing an email, and you can open up Copilot within Outlook and it can summarize or like improve the writing of your email, or you can draft it from scratch. You can help it make your email like more polite or more business-like or something like that. But it's all embedded within M365 applications. Then there's obviously standalone Copilot chat. And so that's very similar to other traditional LLM experiences, where you can ask it to do things. If it's the paid version of Microsoft Copilot, it can reference your information via the graph. It's aware of all your work documents. You can use it for a number of different use cases. And then there's the other areas, which is around custom agents, whether that's agents that people can speak to accomplish different workflows, or actual autonomous agents where they might be doing something behind the scenes without a user asking to do it. Really powerful capabilities that can really transform a business in terms of not just augmenting their users, but completely transforming from the ground up how different parts of the business actually get their work done. And I know, Kim, you'll talk a little bit about this later in terms of the impact on the legal side, like intellectual property and everything. But the key thing here is this is almost like a journey. When you're starting off in terms of Copilot readiness of the customer, you're probably going to start off with quote unquote the more basic use cases that are just integrated with the Microsoft products that they use every day. And it's a journey that you can take them on where they can iteratively see more and more value over time. Yeah, a picture paints 1,000 words. So I added this slide as well, but I'm assuming a lot of you here have probably seen Copilot. But yeah, so let me just move on. And just to hammer home here as well around building agents, there's many options there as well. And again, that narrative that I was talking about, where people can start using Copilot once they're ready, and then they can start even building their own agents. So on the left-hand side, that's Copilot Studio Lite, where an end user who's not technical, they're not an administrator, they can actually build their own agents and discover use cases and start building value just themselves. Or Copilot Studio, where especially as an MSP, you can start developing custom agents to actually transform their processes as well. So let's break this down. Actually, I'm going to skip ahead to my favorite pyramid of the talk. Well, it's actually the only pyramid of the talk. So what does it really mean to be AI ready? So I really break it down into 7 main areas. So first, there's use cases, which I spoke about just now. I think that's something which sometimes people skip over a little bit. So I do like to hammer that home. What problems will Copilot actually solve? And what's the ROI? First part of this is I think there's definitely an opportunity to analyze some of the data that you can get out of the box around M365 adoption. But also it's a conversation, discovery and validation of your customers around, why they're even thinking about AI. And it has to fundamentally boil down to what their business priorities are and what outcomes they're looking to accomplish. Then there's data availability. Is the right data available? Is it in SharePoint, for example, or is it scattered across different locations, or is it on-prem? Security, Copilot provides fantastic abilities to analyze and gather data, so security has to be top of mind. Technical readiness, Copilot has a number of requirements to actually leverage the full functionality on the technical side. Data governance, which I'll go into a bit more detail later on, but making sure that data is managed appropriately depending on how sensitive it is. And also thinking through to, once you've done all this hard work, who gets it first? And being able to plan that effectively is important, because people do judge a book by its cover, and making sure that the first users of Copilot have a good experience and can see the value quickly is going to be very important to ensuring they have a successful AI and Copilot journey throughout the customer lifecycle. So let's break it down into a little bit more detail. So when we think about use cases in M365 adoption, I've covered off some of this already, but I break it down into really like 4 main points. I think the first one, always start with the problems that they want to solve. People might come to you, like a customer might come to you with ideas. They might actually be solutions where they can use Copilot, but always try and ask, like, what's the reason why they're bringing up that topic, and understand how solving that problem actually ties back to some kind of business outcome they're looking to achieve, whether that's a growth objective, trying to reduce like customer churn, enter a new market, save cost, that kind of thing. A big part of this is understanding their business processes. I did a whole webinar on this recently, but one of the tips or the techniques that I really recommend here is user story mapping. So building out a flow chart. If they've got a need to make their sales team more effective, for example, like more efficient, so they can sell more things and grow the business, mapping out their sales process to understand how something like Copilot might make their salespeople more efficient, faster, more effective. And then you can start understanding what the ROI might be and articulate that as part of the business proposal. M365 adoption. There's a lot of data out there where you can understand, who are power users of M365, who might benefit the most from Copilot, and that can tell a big story around across a whole customer. What could the overall ROI for Copilot might be. And then we think about things like security. Now, I think a lot of this for both security and technical prerequisites is probably going to be a bread and butter for many of you. But it's even more important in the age of AI, just because of how powerful the capabilities are. If we think about things like conditional access, MFA being enabled for all users, when we think about Copilot, and if a rogue actor could have access, their ability to quickly gather and extract key information and exfiltrate out the business, it is significant. And so that makes security even more important than it was before. And things like secure score and providing that as part of a service and working with your customers to get it to their goal score is even more important. Things like technical prerequisites, not necessarily prerequisite to start using Copilot, but definitely important to making sure they get the most value. So making sure they're on the right upgrade channel, they've got the right version of M365 apps installed. That makes sure that they can get access to all the Copilot functionality across the M365 applications, and they'll benefit from the features and functionality that get added to Copilot on a very frequent basis. And also, first and foremost, I guess, is the data actually in M365 in the first place? Copilot is powered by the data in the Microsoft Graph, so principally SharePoint, but other areas like OneDrive and Teams. If it's not there, it can't access it and it can't drive value. Data governance is a very key part of this as well. I think in the views of many, this is definitely the biggest growth area for the industry. When we think about security, and like technical prerequisites, a lot of this is bread and butter in terms of modern managed service. But data governance, that I think there's a lot of room for MSPs to step up in terms of moving from providing infrastructure, implementing that in traditional managed services, towards developing a deep understanding around what their customers do with that infrastructure, like where their data is stored, which data they think is sensitive and want to protect, what their business processes are, and how that data is processed and what outcomes they're looking to achieve. And this means that stuff like SharePoint, OneDrive, Teams, having an understanding of how they're configured and how they're used and how that should be changed is very important. And also things like Microsoft Purview, so information protection, data loss protection, understanding if they're used, if they're not, with things like information protection, what information is sensitive and should be protected, and how these can be implemented in a way that supports Copilot readiness without negatively impacting the actual operation of the business. And then also data lifecycle and audit trails. So data lifecycle is very important. Copilot bases its responses on the data it has access to. If a business has got lots of stale data, they've got data in SharePoint that's been sitting there for years and it's no longer relevant, it's going to start undermining the quality of those Copilot responses. And also audit trails. Copilot is very powerful, especially when we think about more advanced use cases where it might be taking action, even autonomously. So having those audit trails in place and enabled in the tenant and across those workloads means that when things are changed, when there's activity, you can track that and monitor that accordingly. And then the last part is having a good rollout plan. As I mentioned earlier, this is key to really a successful customer lifecycle with AI and Copilots. So being able to articulate who gets it first and why, and also having a plan in place to get quick feedback and understand what the adoption and engagement trends are, think about how you're going to improve that ROI. So having almost like use cases that the customer wants to achieve and taking them through those, and also start developing an understanding of, okay, once you've started deploying it to that first department or that first group of power users, what are the upsell opportunities to start growing their use of Copilot across the organization and getting even more value? So implementing controls for AI. I feel like I've talked about this a little bit, covering off all the different considerations, but I've picked out a few key ones. So again, just to go through this hierarchy, I'm going to basically pick probably like 5 or 6 like main things I think are most important to think about when getting a customer more ready for Copilot. So first and foremost, identity and access management. I talked about this a little bit with security. When we think about technology today, cloud first, people standardizing especially on M365, the perimeter is no longer really the endpoints or the network, especially not in the office anymore. It's really the user. And so conditional access, making sure that you've got things like MFA enforced across those users, controlling or minimizing the risk of a malicious actor accessing something as powerful as Copilot is even more important than it was before. SharePoint, OneDrive, and Teams, and those workloads, making sure they're configured correctly. There's many ways that you can configure SharePoint, for example, where it may or may not match the collaboration and external sharing needs of the organization or the particular department. So having an understanding and visibility of how that's configured and what you should configure to suit their needs for Copilot is very important. Sensitive information and data loss protection, so the next two ones, effectively Microsoft Purview is the main tool to think about here. But helping your customer understand what their sensitive data is, and top tip is it's not all equally sensitive, but helping them understand what data is the most sensitive so it can be appropriately labeled, and also implementing the right data loss protection policies. Combined together, not only does this just help the business be more secure and improve their ability to comply with any relevant regulations, but you can implement settings where certain labels might prevent the data from being indexed by Copilot. So if you don't want particularly sensitive information from being available to Copilot to reduce the leakage risk, then this can be a very powerful thing to drive value there as well. Shadow AI monitoring detection. Kim, I think you'll probably touch on this a little bit as well about some of the risks. But shadow AI is massive. As I mentioned earlier, if you don't provide AI, your customers are going to use it anyway, even if it's just a personal, like generative AI product on their phone. But there's opportunities here as well, especially using some of the Defender for Cloud products. You can set up monitoring so you can understand what shadow AI are people using, and that can be great to inform the Copilot readiness talk track, because you can say to your customer, look, they're already using it, but maybe you should use one that integrates directly into M365 and also fits within the kind of security and governance envelope of M365 as well. And of course, you can use those products to block access as well, depending on how you want to go down that route. Last thing I'll mention on this as well is this isn't something where it's a set it and forget it. That the needs of a business changes around collaboration, security, data governance, all of these things, once you've set it, having visibility of uncontrolled drift in these configurations, which could open up these risks again, is very important. But also having regular reviews with your customer, making this a key talking point in terms of QBRs around them to make sure that you've got the right controls that suit their business needs and help them achieve those business outcomes and get them ready for Copilot. I think this is my last slide, and then I'll hand you over to Kim to talk through the legal side of things. But something I would like to talk about is people, process, and technology, because a lot of what I've just talked about is really about tech. It's implementing the right product to solve a problem, etc., etc. But it's not just about tech. A lot of it is about process, especially when we think about getting an SMB or a customer ready for Copilot. You might have to implement some quite significant changes to their environment. You might have to reconfigure SharePoint. You might even have to start from scratch. You might need to implement sensitivity labels for the first time and data loss protection for the first time as well. That could have a non-trivial impact on how people work because they're used to sharing data in a particular way. They could be oversharing data. They might be exposing sensitive information and not really be aware of that. And so all of these changes to their tech will have a change to their process. And you need to take them on that journey and help them understand how that all ties back to the value they're going to get once they're able to use something like Copilot responsibly. And the last piece of that, I guess, is the people side of it as well, which is providing that enablement and that training so that people are able to follow that process properly and better able to leverage things like Copilot once they're ready for it. So the last thing that I'll share, this is my last slide now, Kim. I keep on forgetting which my last slide is I think over the past 2-3 years that we've had generative AI just generally available, it's pretty incredible. I think people get quite complacent sometimes with what it's capable of doing. It's amazing, what technology we have access to do. But what's even more amazing is the tools that we have today will truly be the worst ones that we'll ever work with. Like in a month, there'll be another model that's available. and we'll be talking about how the stuff today was not very good, and just the pace of change is amazing. So never forget that. But yeah, on that bombshell, over to you, Kim, to talk about the legal and compliance side.
Yeah, thank you. And it is so true. Like the AI we're using now is the worst we're ever going to experience, which is why I'm on the flip side of all the opportunity, and I obviously have to look at the risk. But I'm here to sort of help safeguard you guys in thinking about all of the kind of nuggets that you have to think about when it comes to using AI, whether you're using it on behalf of your customer, whether you're using it internally, whether you just want a simple understanding of what's going on here with this AI landscape, because it's changing the legal landscape every single day. So Freddie, if you could just go to the next slide for me, please. You'll see I've got 3 buckets here, essentially, of what I would term as the high risk issues of using AI. Freddie talked about shadow AI. I think one thing you all have to be aware of is when I talk about AI use and the risk of AI use, remember this is very much more prevalent when it's shadow AI because you're not even aware of it. People are not aware of these tools being used, and therefore these risks that are inherent are going out without knowledge, and that's even worse in that scenario. Let's look at these 3 buckets, because as a lawyer, these are the 3 things I focus on all the time. Data privacy, a lot of people are very aware of it. We're obviously going to go into detail. Freddie, you touched upon it as well. We're used to this because of GDPR, so this is a little bit more known. But the 2 buckets that really are not known, but or at least sort of there's a lot more mystery around them. One is the intellectual property and one's confidentiality. So let me touch upon intellectual property. So when you're using AI, when you're inputting AI, whoever is inputting that AI, the very first question you have to ask yourself is, do you have the right to put that data in? Is that your intellectual property or is it somebody else's intellectual property? Now, if you're aware of it, great. If you know how to handle that, great. But if it's shadow AI and people are not aware of that, then there could be massive breaches in contract. Okay, so they're sort of fundamental things to sort of understand. Also to educate your team in understanding all the potential leaks going out there, all the potential risks going out there, and get them to ask the question, are they aware of where this intellectual property is arising? And I think with that as well, if it's somebody else's IP, you need to make sure you've got the rights to do it. Probably you don't. So don't use it, because we don't know what happens with IP and AI use. I mean, you have to look at the terms and conditions of the AI tool, but more often than not, it's either going open source or it's being owned by that AI tool. So be really prevalent, be really focused on that. When you're looking at your own IP, and I'm going to touch on the case study here that actually Freddie and I spoke about yesterday. But when you're putting your intellectual property, though you're more in control of that, do you know and fundamentally understand what that means for your business? Because if that intellectual property, let's talk about business systems, processes, whatever it could be, if it's being inputted and you don't actually own the right afterwards, what's that doing to the valuation of your business? Because at the end of the day, when you go to exit your business and they're asking about the intellectual property that you own, are you sure you've ring fenced and you've protected that correctly? Let's go to an example. So Freddie and I were discussing this yesterday, and Freddie was saying that often you get sort of asked the question, I want to create an agent. I want to do this for my clients, but where does the IP sit with that? Right? And it's an interesting question because it depends, which is a very lawyer answer. But it depends on what you're doing with this IP and how you're creating it. If it's custom, bespoke development, how much of that is really bespoke to the client, and therefore the client would want to own it? How much of it is actually your general knowledge, your know-how that you should be ring fencing so that you can rinse and repeat and create lots of agents across different industries and businesses? But again, be aware that if you don't protect that position in your contracts, you could be leaking that intellectual property that you think you own, and you're going right to the exit of your business and thinking you're owning that. And then they're turning around saying you don't actually own it. So that valuation's out the door. So again, very high level. If you want to discuss this with me directly, feel free. But that's really important if you're looking at creating agents. Okay, how are you going to protect that, safeguard that? Let's talk about breach of confidentiality here now. Same vein as IP. Whatever you're inputting into AI, make sure you're aware, you are understanding of what that data is. But here's another question for you. Are you confident that you even know what confidential data is? And I don't mean that in a glib way. If customers are giving you data, are you verifying that that is part of a confidential information, or if it's just a, you're able to share that out? And are your employees who might take hold of that confidential information aware of it too? So I think really being aware of that, because again, what I'm most concerned about as a lawyer here is the risk that you're carrying is through breach of contract, potentially risk of reputational loss. We're going to talk about that in a second, some of these other risk areas, these sort of consequences to this. But these are things that really are important in running your business effectively well and creating that opportunity that AI is giving you, but in a safe environment, as Freddie alluded to before. Data privacy, questions you have to ask yourself, as you do anyway. Where is the data being stored and processed in this AI tool? How, what sub-processes are involved? Are there any consents needed? So, for example, a lot of AI tools are using profiling. They're using things that even images. A lot of people are now using AI for images and videos. Have you got the right consent to use that into the AI tool? Have you effectively flowed that down into your customer contract? Have you looked at your employee policies? There's a whole remit around data privacy that's not just, where is it stored and where is it processed? It's what do I have to communicate to my clients, to my employees about how this is being used? So doing the due diligence is a really key component. So those three kind of categories, I would say, whenever you're looking at an AI tool, whether it's for you, on behalf of your customer, try to get people to start thinking about these issues and asking the deeper questions so that you can find the root to the answers. And then the best thing is to communicate those through your policies and your contracts, and we'll go on to what documents you need. Freddie, if you could move on to the next slide for me, please. Okay, so here's a few sort of consequences and further risks of using AI. Obviously, the internal data breaches. We have heard of stories, certainly in the early days of Copilot, where there was financial information and employees were getting hold of financial information and salaries and what have you, and that's really not a great. That's not a great place to be. So really, sort of ring fencing and understanding how is data shared? How is it stored? How is it secured within as well as without outside of that too? We touched upon GDPR, but there's obviously other regulations you need to be aware of depending on where you're trading and who you're doing business with. And essentially things like HIPAA if you're over in the States or you're working with an American company, the EU AI Act for Europe as well. Now, it's interesting because we've obviously adopted AI principles, and you can see that in the ICO website. They will always keep you updated with the AI frameworks, but we're looking to regulate more heavily next year. And where we're going is going to be a halfway point between the American regulations and the EU ones that are very restrictive. So we're looking at sort of a hybrid of the two. Reputational damage. Freddie was explaining about the opportunity and what you can create. But if you don't think of your legal and compliance and you've got your ducks in a row, you're going to be creating some reputational damage for yourself and for your customers. And that's going to have a loss of trust for your employees and your clients as well. So yeah, there's a few more in here as well. You've got employee turnover. They're worried about their own privacy. Again, we talked about how you might be using employee information in some of these AI tools, especially in the marketing department. Make sure that you're looking at your policies, make sure that you're getting consent where you need to, but also in the same way, you need to make sure that your privacy policies are adjusted to reflect what you're using now. I liken this to websites because a lot of people are using AI bots on websites. And essentially, your privacy policy on your website should indicate how the data is being stored. And you need to be aware if you're using a third-party tool in your website, how are they storing that data? Is there any profiling happening in that data? And making sure that you're communicating that to your clients too, to the people visiting your website. Customer losses here on the bottom right. When I talk about breach of contract, that's a severe issue. That's not just a terminating of contracts. You're not just going to lose the client. There's a potential a damage claim against you. And when you're not understanding of those three buckets and you haven't done the due diligence correctly, you can't always hide behind, oh, I've excluded my losses in here and I've excluded my losses here. You have to be seen to be doing the right thing at all times. Of course, you can prevent some of the risk, but you can't do everything. If we could go to the next slide, please, Freddie. So here's some documents really for you to to think about when you're looking at your legal and compliance responsibilities. I talked about the privacy policy that normally sits on your website. Make sure you're looking at that again. If you haven't looked at it recently, you're probably out of date already, especially if you're using AI tools on your website. So get that up to date. Seek some legal advice if you need to understand what you need to put in there. Website terms and conditions and cookie policies, they also will reside on your website. But this is important because some people will go and use your chatbot on your website if you have one, and they could be putting in all kinds of stuff because you don't know who where they're all coming from. So it's ensuring you have like an indemnity that's protecting your business so that those people are not just misusing and abusing your own AI features on your website. And a lot of people use it because they convert really well. They convert leads into, from leads to conversion. So really important to sort of look at that. Client-facing contracts need AI clauses now. Your standard contract terms, they need to explain how you're using AI, where the IP is sitting if you're creating an agent web. We touched upon that already. You can exclude some losses, obviously, in your contracts, and it's making sure you know how to write that. Please don't use ChatGPT to do that because it will hallucinate, tell you the best practice, and it's not at all. But please make sure that you're looking at those terms really carefully and excluding what you're able to, because a lot of it is third parties and you can do your due diligence, but you're not always in charge of everything that's happening because it's not always your tool. HR internal policies. Now, Freddie, you talked about, making sure you're monitoring and training. That's really key. Shadow AI is incredibly prolific. So how are you monitoring that? How are you getting your customers to think about that? And what kind of training can you put in place for them to enable them to understand the risks and why these things are key and critical and important? So you're helping them mitigate against security issues. Consent, we touched upon that as well. If you've got any kind of images that you're using, there's a few friends of mine who run businesses and they're using AI imagery tools and they're creating videos out of people's images. And the first thing I said to them is, okay, did you make sure did you get consent? If this is your client, did you get consent to use their photo, their face on this AI tool? Are they aware of how that AI tool is going to use their image going forwards? So being really aware of that. DPIA, we should all have one, hopefully, but please make sure you're maintaining and you're evolving that and you are paying attention to all of the updates that are happening. The next one here is the ICO. Go to the website, have somebody internally who likes process to go onto the ICO and regularly get the updates, because that's going to help your business evolve with the AI rules. So you're always up to date with that. You're always being seen to be completely compliant, so no one can sort of slap you on the wrist for heavy fines and the rest of it. And basically keep an eye on your intellectual property and your DPA rights always. Do that due diligence, understand the criterias, and consult when you need to consult. And I think that was it from me, Freddie.
Cool. Thank you, Kim. Let me just advance the slide. Reference of our handout again, which we'll send after this. But let's go to the Q&A now. So in fact, I'll show this for a second if people want to take a screenshot and get our contact details. I think, Kim, you mentioned you're happy for people to reach out, myself as well. Anyone's got any ideas, wants to talk about AI, feel free to get in touch. But I'm going to stop sharing so I can see the Q&A and see if we have any questions. So let's have a look at the Q&A first. Right, I'll start the ones asked at the back at the start. So Charles asked, will the deck be shared with 5 upvotes? So yes, that will be shared. Ronnie asked about the deck as well. Yep, that'll definitely be shared. Ronnie's asked, how can you make sure your agents are hardened? For example, AI prompt injection. I think that's a really good example, and I think AJ's mentioned around DSPM and Purview can definitely help with this. But it's a very good observation that it's not bulletproof. There's no cast iron mitigation to any of this. From my side, a couple of key things that I'll mention is planning out what that agent can do. So that if there is prompt injection, the negative consequences are mitigated. So if it can take actions, having a good understanding of what those actions are and controlling those, controlling people's access to that agent to make sure it's kind of suitable and authenticated. But also, using things like Purview on the monitoring and auditing side as well to just reduce the risk of that. But I think one of the main challenges with generative AI and the whole industry is tackling this is it's non-deterministic and it can be socially engineered. So I think sometimes the tooling is still kind of catching up to a degree. Cool. The next question is for Kim. Do you have something we can use to help guide clients towards awareness of these types of issues? A list of these that we can present to make sure they understand all the areas of risk.
Yeah, so actually in the handout, we've got a compliance checklist that you can definitely use as a starting point. In terms of the complex, it's quite a complex area. So obviously it's hard to sort of put down everything that could go wrong with these types of clauses, but that checklist is a really good starter and a good conversation starter with your clients, making sure that they're aware of it. And if there's some things that come up from that conversation, feel free to reach out.
Cool, thank you, Kim. And the next question is, any recommendations for how an MSP might assist or provide DPIA for their clients?
I think sitting down with so that is a really great question actually, because a lot of people don't even know what to write in their DPIA, and I think they don't know about the technical remits around how data is being used, and sitting down with them and going through their form, because they should all have a standard form on that, and finding out where the gaps of knowledge are. Really, you need to just sit down with them and find out what you're using and where that data is being stored and used.
Perfect. Next question is around DSPM. So will there be a best practice DSPM for AI configuration on your Discord or even as a feature enforcer? That's a great question. What I'll share at this stage is right now we're building our first support for the Purview stack within Microsoft, which is, of course, an entire portfolio of its own right. So the first step there will be supporting data loss protection policies, which we're working on right now, and then sensitivity labels. And we'll be looking at additional Purview capabilities moving forwards as well, just because that data governance piece is just so critical to successful AI adoption. So yeah, I'm always open to discussion there as well in terms of what we need to do there, because there's a lot of stuff in Purview. So we need to make sure we get good feedback in terms of what to prioritize. Next question for you, Kim. So what with ISO 42001 in mind, how do you recommend approaching data processing in non-UK or EU countries?
Yeah, I'm just reading. So, e.g., a toolset an MSP has used for a long time, introduces free AI, including the toolset. So, any type of data processing in a non-UK or EU country, you need to figure out where the data is being held for that. I think it's a bit of a tough question to answer. Maybe DM me, Adam, because I think there's a bit more information I kind of need from you on that one. But always understand where the data is being held and processed to understand what regulations you might be under.
Cool, perfect. Next question is around the F4 milestones and tasks a good start on as AI compliance. I'm not personally acquainted with what F4 milestones are, Kim. I'm not sure if that rings a bell.
No idea.
Carrie, if you feel free to follow up in the chat or just reach out directly as well, and we can discuss that. Cool. I'm just gonna have a quick look at the chat as well, just to see if we have any questions as well. Okay, we've had a very good discussion around the architecture of M365. Looks very good. Cool. Next question is, any suggested documentation repositories for AI in CMMC environments? I'm not 100% au fait with that acronym either, Kim. I'm not sure if you are. So if you can follow up, Casey, with the acronym. I think the challenge with this compliance side of things is every country has their own organization and
compliance
standards.
rules.
Well, like in the UK, we've got the ICO, we've got DPIA, which doesn't exist in every country, and all sorts of stuff.
Yeah, there is a question from AJ, and it's a good one. So seems like EU is quite a bit ahead of the US 100% regarding AI and data privacy from a non-lawyer perspective. Is that accurate? Yeah, it is. US are very lax with any kind of regulation around that. It's an interesting time really for the UK as well, because as I said, they're trying to adopt a hybrid model. So between the Uber restrictions that there are in the EU AI Act versus the Uber lax version in the US. So it's we are obviously adopting AI principles and frameworks already, which is why I'm saying do have a look at the ICO website, because they're really good at, and in any kind of regulation you might be touching upon as well, because they will tell you. But yeah, they are. Thanks for that, AJ.
Perfect. I'm conscious that we're rapidly running out of time. We've got another question. When is the AI readiness assessment coming out in Enforcer? That's a great question. I know we talked about that in the roadmap webinar a few weeks ago. Yeah, we're still working on it. We're very excited about what the first iteration will include, and yeah, we'll look to provide an update very, very soon as to the timelines on that. But we're nearly there. Perfect. Just checking the chat again. Question from Alex in the chat: will we get a recording of this? I believe we will. I think we'll send the recording. We'll send the PowerPoint deck as well as the transcripts, I believe.
And the handout as well.
And the handout as well. Yes, of course. Don't forget the handout. Kim, another question for you. So since we attended this, do we get 3 free questions from Kim after the webinar?
Sorry, I didn't even see it. Someone asking for free questions.
Yes.
Oh, yeah, you can always DM me. I will always be able to, yeah, anybody who wants some advice, reach out to me on LinkedIn, reach out to me on my email. I'm more than happy to help people on this journey. I love it to bits. I have an AI business, so I've had to look at this not just from a legal point of view, but from a business owner's point of view as well. And helping the MSP transition to the MIP, the managed intelligence provider, is a big passion of mine, helping them really kind of transform to that. So absolutely, anytime anybody wants some free advice, feel free to come to me. No problem.
Cool. Are there any more questions? Cool. Well, if there's nothing else, firstly, thank you all for giving up some of your valuable time to attend today. Kim, thank you very much as well for being a gracious co-host and to talk about the legal and compliance side, which of course I can't talk to at all. And also thank you everyone for the great questions and discussion as well. I think clearly this industry is changing so quickly and there's lots of unknowns, and everyone's still kind of learning. So it's great to just have that discussion and figure stuff out together. So yeah, I will see you all at one of our next webinars.
Thank you guys. Thank you. Bye-bye.